With 2023 coming to a close, we just wanted to tell everyone thanks so much for subscribing and tuning in and watching our videos. As we move into 2024, just know that there are lots of exciting new adventures coming your way. So as we close out the year, we'd like to give you a little present from us, a story from my childhood called The Best Gift I Never Opened. In the summer of 1965, my mom and dad moved their 5 children away from Detroit, Michigan to Alexandria, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C. Tall and blinking, the Washington Monument flashed a red and white warning as our plane circled the city below. Flying over statue-guarded bridges and blossom-blanketed cherry trees, a rectangular outline that was the Lincoln Memorial came into view. When our plane banked sharply to the left, the city disappeared. Stars rushed past my window in a burning blur of light. Looking back over my shoulder, past the seats of other passengers, and out a small oval window, I spied the perfect circle of lights that was the Jefferson Monument, while the glowing Capitol dome bounced in and out of view. We touched down safely, and the plane's propellers ground down to a halt as I held my mother's hand tightly. As we exited the plane to walk down a stairwell that was rolled up and attached to our airplane, we were right on the tarmac, just a short distance separating us from the active runways, engines firing, nose and tail lights flashing, and a vast expanse of cement vibrating under my feet. My dad had already been in Virginia, setting up household and getting settled at work when we arrived. He was just inside the large terminal windows, and I recognized him and his familiar overcoat and hat, waving a welcome to us. Of course, Mom was dressed with a nice hat and a lovely suit coat. We were all dressed up. Everyone dressed to the hilt in those days, just to fly on a plane. It was nearly midnight when we arrived at our new house and went up the dark driveway through what seemed like a very woodsy area. We unloaded suitcases for the 7 of us into the carport, and we walked into the house, anticipating sleeping on the floor. The moving van, with all of our furniture packed inside, was still somewhere on the road between where we stood in Alexandria, Virginia, and Michigan. A new sound chimed from the front landing. Was that the doorbell? Yes! Our newest neighbors were standing at the door. Mr. Wes Hayden carried in blankets and pillows. Mrs. Hazel Hayden had prepared a thermos of hot cocoa, and their 2 sons had folded cots up under their arms. They marched in a welcome wagon army. That night began 7 years of cheering and jeering for the Washington Redskins on Sundays, toasting in New Year's Eves, wearing funny hats, and many a holiday meal that would stretch dining tables into our respective living rooms. The Haydens and the Hirsches helped each other through seasons of shoveling snow and raking leaves. Closest to me was Hazel Hayden, an upright Southern woman living outside of Washington, D.C., because her husband was at the time press secretary to the Honorable Senator Everett Jordan of the state of North Carolina, a state where her heart remained. She opened up her home to me. We'd spend hours playing gin rummy at her table. Together we crafted angels from Reader's Digests or pine cones in her basement. It felt like a game when I polished her furniture with Lemon Pledge. Constantly underfoot was this wonderful dog, Princess, a gentle mix of German Shepherd and Collie. The patient animal endured hours of me dressing her up like a baby, cramming her into a doll carriage, and strolling her around the neighborhood. I guess she didn't mind the attention because she adopted herself into our family over the course of my childhood. Princess would wait each afternoon at the bus stop for all of the children to be dropped off, but she walked home with me. Every thunderstorm would bring her whining to our back door, and we gladly dried her with a towel and phoned her home to let them know Princess is okay. She's with Sally. During the winter, we would bring her inside, tenderly defrosting the snowballs that would build up between the pads of her paws. Princess was a part of the good times and there to comfort us in the scariest of times. When Mrs. Hayden's oldest son, Ken, whom we joked she called Ken, crushed his hand between his car and the jack he had tried to lift it with, Princess barked to rally the neighbors who ran to lift the car and free him. When we waited time and again next to the radio, listening for draft numbers, which could potentially call one of my 3 brothers to war, Princess's head nuzzled deeply into my lap for comfort. In 1972, a single ominous radio report brought all of the current violence of assassinations and assassination attempts crashing into our lives. News broke into regular programming with a report that Wes Hayden, our neighbor, had been hit by a random bullet while campaigning for Senator Jordan at a shopping center in Raleigh, North Carolina.
WPTF News presents Regional Report, a digest of late happenings throughout the area. Here is Dan Giddens.
Good afternoon. An unidentified black man shot and wounded at least 6 persons at North Hills Shopping Center at noon today in what may have been an attempt on the life of U.S. Senator B. Everett Jordan.
To incumbent Senator B. Everett Jordan, Wes Hayden of Washington, D.C., who was critically injured.
I can vividly recall staying with Mrs. Hayden and helping her pack a bag as she paced her bedroom floors, awaiting a phone call from the Secret Service in regards to the condition of her husband who had been shot. "I'll never fuss at that man again," she prayed to God, "if you just let him make it through this." The phone rang and Hazel handed it to my mother as she dropped on the edge of the bed. My mother simply answered, "All right, they're coming to pick you up. Let's get you ready." Princess or her master could not have meant more to me than one very special Christmas morning. That morning I had been awoken very early as my brothers coaxed me out of bed to look out the window. It had appeared as though tracks were on the hills of our backyard. The chiseled tracks ended abruptly at the edge of the sidewalk, and I ran down the stairs to burst outside. I walked out in just my pajamas into the icy slush of the patio. Chewed carrots and mushed Cheerios were scattered on the landing pad. Assessing the scene, I determined it could be only one thing: Santa's sleigh. I was sure of it. Christmas magic had brought reindeer directly to our house the night before. I refused to consider any other possibility. Of course, later I did spy my brothers rolling up garden hoses and noticed carrot stalks dumped into Mom's kitchen sink. As soon as the family had torn through that morning's wrappings, ribbons, and cocoa, we scattered. And I was looking underneath the tree for batteries. As I tore through the scraps of ribbons and corners of paper, I spied an ungiven tag. The tag read, "To Sally, love, Mrs. Hayden." It was attached to Princess's collar. Who left this collar here? What was Princess wearing, if anything, in its place? Was she all right? Had something happened to her? I was envisioning in my mind an episode of Rin Tin Tin, with his master Rusty holding only a collar in his hands, believing something terrible had happened to the beloved German Shepherd canine Star. I imagined the planning and plotting that had gone on the night before. Was this gift a surprise, an acknowledgement of Princess's love? I felt a sudden and new funny feeling, as if I was stealing someone's precious pet. I was too young to ask questions as to why the gift was never given. I only kept thinking, well, the day's not over yet. I put the collar back underneath the tree and left it alone. The day continued, and Christmas ended without fanfare. The next day, Princess arrived at our house without the collar. It was still under the tree. I continued to keep quiet. I wasn't sure what to say about this ungiven gift. The following weekend, I noticed Princess had her collar on again. It had disappeared from under the tree. No comment, no notice, no explanation. If I ever tried to bring up the subject of a gift not given, Mrs. Hayden and my mother would pooh-pooh the notion of ever giving away a beloved pet. Tears would well up in her eyes, knowing the gift of Princess's love had already been given and received. On Christmas Eve of 1999, my husband drove us and our 3 children 2 hours off the path on our trip to my brother's home to visit Hazel Hayden, now widowed, living closest to her daughter in a tiny little community near Pinehurst. My plan was to thank her for the years of creativity she had licensed me in her basement and backyard, as I molded happily a collection of nature and crafts and interesting things. Hazel had nurtured my ability to dream up a craft using simply pine cones, glue, sticky balls, newspaper, rocks, glitter, anything I could find, and I cherished that gift she had given me. As we entered her small home, a caregiver was preparing her evening meal. Hazel quickly rose gingerly from her easy chair to greet the young family. However, her eyes were vague, drifting across our faces, straining to make some response to our visits. I quickly realized that Hazel Hayden was desperately trying to focus on her surroundings. She didn't recognize me, so I started to show her framed photographs of her grandchildren on the wall. She couldn't tell me their names. I came across a black and white image of Mr. Hayden with a dignitary standing in front of the White House. She couldn't tell me if he was alive or deceased. I realized very quickly that Alzheimer's stood firmly between Hazel and her memories. Time had marched on. Time marched all over my heart that day. As I continued down the hallway of black and white family photos, I boldly removed one of the pictures. It was a picture of myself and Princess standing with the family on an Easter Sunday afternoon. As I held up the faded photo, pointing out Princess, a dim and distant snapshot of Hazel's life came into focus in her mind's eye. She looked directly at me, called me Sally, and spoke clearly about the dog who loved us both more than 30 years before. Thanks again for sharing this story with us. The best gift I never opened. A big shout out as well to our supporters: Tours St. Augustine, Beaconberry Farms, Gabby's Cabins, Ryan at WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Jim and Marilyn Greer, as well as Lula, Mercantile, and Vintage Shop. It's been a great 2023, and we look forward to more histories and mysteries in 2024.